Recently, Steve Rose, a writer for The Guardian, wrote an article entitled "How Post-Horror Movies Are Taking Over Cinema," and this was in response to the recent UK release of It Comes at Night, which went down well with critics but not so much audiences, given its promotional material didn't match up to the film itself, very much in the same vein as Robert Eggers' The Witch. What people were expecting was a jump scare horror movie about a creature stalking a family in the woods, because that's what it seemed to advertise, when in fact it's more of a minimalist human drama about a family during a time of uncertainty. The article is then structured around an interview with the writer-director Terry Edward Schultz, who explains his vision for It Comes at Night, which, in response, Steve Rose calls it a post-horror film, which is his own self-titled subgenre for horror films that tackle profound and existential issues. So basically your artsy-fartsy horror movie that lacks any real scares. Now, this has inspired a lot of debate amongst the horror community, as it seems to imply that there is a higher, superior form or category of horror movie above the rest, which simply isn't true. Now, I asked my patrons and followers on Twitter what their thoughts were on the topic, and after taking time to digest it myself, I only have this to say. This isn't anything new. Postmodern cinema has been a massive theoretical debate for a very long time, and what Steve Rose presents is a very thin representation of a basic academic philosophy. Now, that's not a criticism to Rose himself. I understand that his specialty is in film, architecture, and general arts, so I don't doubt his thinking. But the general criticism I find in my experience with academic research is that you could apply post to virtually anything to justify an intellectual narrative. It doesn't change the narrative, but it does imply a certain standard and expectation. In fact, in my own academic writing, what I found was, when I was doing my dissertation, I had to remove an entire paragraph on animation being a postmodern trend in documentary film because I found it was ultimately irrelevant considering what documentary as a genre and what animation as a style technically and objectively were. Genres are simply classifications based on a film's iconography, and then the sub-attachment is just a means of contextualizing the style of that particular film. We have slapstick comedies and dark comedies, we have hard science fiction and soft science fiction, we have supernatural horror and slasher horror. The point I'm making is that we have an endless selection of titles to apply to any film, that it's ironically postmodern within itself because it's free, subjective, and even skeptical of having a definitive classification. I mean, take any film, for example, like David Cronenberg's The Fly. It's a science fiction, but to fully classify it, we could call it a sci-fi body horror romantic tragedy. They're all accurate classifications, but it's still a science fiction. Hell, A24, who reviewed by the article as being responsible for the supposed genre shift, responded by calling a ghost story, which, for the record, has not even remotely claimed to be a horror movie in any shape or form, not a horror movie, not a post-horror movie, but a movie about time and the enormity of our existence. That can be taken any way you want, but as far as A24 are concerned, what it's about remains objectively the same. Whether or not It Comes at Night, the vision for the story doesn't change. You can't relabel a film to rationalize a mixed response. Yes, you can reevaluate the meaning of a film in years to come, but the fact still remains that nothing will ever change, bar the perspective of the audience. Remember, The Exorcist was viewed as the scariest film ever made, but through time, many writers have reevaluated its significance as a horror movie. It's still a horror movie, but it's received with greater poignancy about a priest having a crisis of belief and coming to terms with his own morality. We no longer have one mass objective audience. Today we are fragmented into a wide spectrum of varying beliefs and attitudes, so regardless of what the audience perceived the story to be, as long as the iconic components that establish the tone and atmosphere remain true to the genre, it's exactly what it says it is. Regardless if The Babadook uses horror as a metaphor for grief or The Witch uses supernatural elements to explore religious paranoia, they are still undoubtedly horror movies. Not post-horror, just plain old traditional horror. Yes, they're not Blumhouse jumpscare fest like every 15-year-old wants these days, but who is to say that was imperative to the genre? It's a lot of hot air really as a topic is concerned. We should be less concerned with applying pretensions to cater to snobby perceptions of a film, and instead we should simply be more concerned with seeing and encouraging good cinema. on, Barney. Let's go. Come on, buddy.